Hello, Dave Baiocchi here. I am here with my 7-minute crash course on getting the best output from AI chatbots. The reason I have this is because these tools are entirely different creatures. They're totally different than anything we've ever used before, and they don't come with instruction manuals. So when I give you a shovel, a new tool, you know what a shovel is. You have some intuition for how to use it. If I give you something that has 3 arms and a handle and a weirdly shaped thing at the end, you're like, I don't even know what this is. I can't even start to wrap my mind around how it might be useful. So the goal of the next 7 minutes is to give you a crash course, build some intuition on what these tools are good at so that you can hit the ground running and avoid some of the beginner mistakes. So I've summarized this all into 3 keys into using these tools effectively. And the first thing is to adopt a manager's mindset. What do I mean by that? The most important analogy I can give you is that using a chatbot is like having a tireless army of smart interns. And what does that mean? Well, if you got a bunch of interns, like they've read a ton of stuff and they're really good at connecting ideas, they're often able to see stuff maybe that you're not able to. However, they are not specialists in anything. They have zero real world experience, and they know absolutely nothing about you, your project, or your specific goals. So already, just looking at these 3 bullets on the left, we can start to build a little bit of intuition on what something like this could be used for and be good at. It also suggests what your role is. So this isn't just you turning over the steering wheel. This is you forming a partnership with this tool and bringing the best of everything that you have and taking advantage of the fact that now all of a sudden you have this tireless army of smart interns. So your role is to be a good manager, and you have to provide all the information the intern needs in order to succeed at the task. You would imagine that if you got a human intern on day 1 and you just gave them a really big project and you said, here, go solve this, they would go off, and I'm sure they'd be a great intern, and they would probably come back with something after having done some work. But having not gotten any direction from you, any background and context, no definition of what success looks like, no hints on like, well, if I was getting started on this, here's a couple things I would try first. If you didn't give a human intern any of that context, even if they're the smartest person in the world, they're going to come back with something that's not going to be terribly useful to you. And the chatbots work exactly the same way. So I always tell people that you need to pretend that you have interns and you need to give them the information they need in order to succeed at the task. And so that is actually the biggest thing I can tell you to help build some intuition around what these tools are good at. So as I just said, you would never give a new human intern on their first day on the job, summarize this request for a proposal for me, right? No, what you'd really do is you'd send them down. You give them the file, sure, but then you'd also say, well, based on my experience, here's what I know about this client and what they're asking me to do. You tell them what you want them to do. You give them a little bit of a hint on what success looks like. And armed with that information, they should be able to come back and give you a pretty good first draft that then you can work to refine. Okay, the second thing that I like to talk about is the reliability spectrum. So when these tools first came out, they had a habit of hallucinating. So that's the term of art for the fact that these things will tend to make stuff up if you do not act like a good manager and give them the information they need to solve the problem. So 2 things have happened in the 3 years since these tools have come out. First, they've become slightly more self-aware. So a lot of them now, if you ask them to do something and they don't have the knowledge to be able to solve the problem, they will actually ask you, hey, I need you to give me these things before I can actually solve it for you. The second thing is that I've been using these enough that I've created sort of my own little framework to help guide you and set yourself up and put yourself in a position such that you're always going to get reliable answers. And so I always tell people you should be working in the zone of high reliability. And what that means is you should be asking it questions about content that you provide, like a paper, a data set, document. If you're giving it information off your website, don't send it to your website. Copy the text off your website and put it in the window. If you're asking about an academic paper, do not paste the link to the academic paper. Go find the paper and bring the paper to the chatbot. And in that way, you will always basically be asking it to summarize information you have already given it. And in those situations, these tools are extremely reliable. Now, they might misinfer sometimes. And so in that case, you always want to read what they write and just make sure that they have inferred the insights correctly based on what information you've given them. But the chances of them just really blatantly making something up out of the blue is really slim. The opposite end of that spectrum is when you're working in the low reliability zone where you're asking it to be an oracle because you haven't given it the information it needs in order to solve the problem. And in those situations, yes, it absolutely will make stuff up. So the classic example here is if you ask it, hey, I need you to find me the best paper on the finest way to grow corn. It actually isn't a specialist in the field of corn, in the academic research on corn. It may go out to the internet. You don't know what it looks for. You don't know what it doesn't look for. It'll come back with an article, maybe that's real, maybe not, but you are working in the zone of lower reliability in that case. And so what you want to do is you want to be the one to use other tools to go find that best paper, bring it back to this tool, and then ask it to summarize it for you, or whatever work you're going to do with it. Okay, the third concept on my crash course here is that you have to iterate with it. So the superpower of these tools isn't finding the perfect prompt. It's the iterative conversation you have with it. And so I observe two common beginner mistakes when people start using these tools. And the first mistake is that they feel like there's a perfect prompt, a perfect way to ask. And my answer is always, there's not. The beauty of these tools is they will communicate the way you do. You don't have to learn a special language. You don't have to feel like there's a formula you have to perform in order to get the right prompt in. You just have to start having a conversation with it. No different than the human intern that enters your office. You would likely start with, oh, how are you doing today, right? And then go on to, well, we're going to talk about this project. And then the intern might say something like, well, tell me more. And then the conversation would unfold from there. So first mistake is thinking that you have to be perfect when you prompt it, and you don't. That's part of the magic. The second mistake is in trying to get too much done in one go. So an example of that might be if you were to prompt it to say, hey, I've got this event coming up. I need you to help me think about the speaker, the events, the entertainment, and can you write me the text for all of the email invites that are going to go out? It's going to do a fine job at that. But you will be much happier with the result if in your head you break that into a bunch of smaller tasks and you work on each of those tasks individually. Now, you might be thinking, why am I doing that? The power move there is that by breaking the larger task into a bunch of smaller ones, you're actually teaching it as you go. So the first thing you might say is like, hey, I have an event coming up and I need your help planning it. Already, I have taught it what my context is and what the problem is, what the big problem is I need to help me solve it, right? And so maybe my first task is to think of a name for this event, in which case I'm going to have to tell it, well, here's the type of people I think I'm looking for, here's the general things we're going to talk about. And already through the conversation, I'm actually teaching it. And so this is the trick to being able to get really well tailored results out of these tools. It's the difference between having this tool create you a custom suit versus just buying something off the rack that is kind of awkward and sort of fits, but could be a lot better in a bunch of different ways. So the trick to iterating also means that it removes this pressure of feeling like you have to you only have one chance to ask the question. And you don't. What I tell people is that before, if we had spent an hour writing something, we may have spent the first hour by ourselves, the first 55 minutes getting to that first draft, and then the final 5 minutes, like doing some refinement. This tool allows me to get a pretty serviceable first draft in the first 5 minutes. And then with the remaining 55 minutes, I can be iterating once or twice an hour to be refining all the little pieces that I really need to do to fine tune it for my audience or my purpose or whatever the larger goal is. And so I'm still maybe spending an hour on the task, but at the end of that hour, I am ending up with something so much more bulletproofed and thoughtful and creative and like hits the mark and has the right tone than if I was just left to my own devices. Okay, so here's what iteration looks like in practice. An example of trying to do too much at once would be to give it the request for proposal and just prompt it and say, hey, read this and write me a proposal. It will come back with an answer. It will not be as good as if you start to say, hey, take a look at this proposal. What's your view on what the core problem is the client wants solved in here? And then you might iterate on that a few times to refine the problem statement based on stuff that you, as the human, know about the client, the problem space, whatever. And then so on. And you can imagine if by taking this iterative approach, you're going to end up with a proposal that is truly tailored to the client's need. Okay, so that is my quick crash course on getting you up and running for building a little bit of intuition on how to use these tools well if you've never used these tools. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.